The best democratic systems are those that fairly represent the views of the public. Most countries are bad at this. Crafting a system where the number of seats awarded to each party reflects their proportional vote is difficult, but usually these systems can be considered broadly effective. If more of the public vote in a certain way, that is generally reflected by a win for that side. However, the Hong Kong Legislative Council, as seen in a previous video, is only partially democratic. Let's see how that affects its representation and its share of power compared to a system that is more proportional. The Hong Kong political situation is complicated. Really complicated. In most democracies, two parties share most of the vote. In Hong Kong, the highest polling party receives just under 17%, and there are at least 17 more parties and a bunch of independents who receive a significant number of votes. But one of the main components of Hong Kong's political spectrum are camps. Hong Kong's parties have historically split into the pro-Beijing camp and the pan-democracy camp, but this was further complicated after the umbrella movement when the localism camp grew. So we can consider these three camps as coalitions. Although they won't always vote together, it can be useful to see their power when they do. And as the pan-democrats and localists share many similar views, it can also be useful to consider them as a single anti-establishment coalition. Here we'll do both. So the 2016 election saw a swing against the pro-Beijing parties of about 2.5%, but the big swings were between the other two camps. The pan-democrats lost 20% of their vote, mostly to the localists who have not had any previous electoral success. This resulted in a LegCo that looks like this. The pro-Beijing and pan-democrat camps have lost 3 seats each and the localists have gained 5. Is this representative? Well, it's hard to see with all of this mess. Although the pro-Beijing camp gained just 40% of the vote, they actually won 57% of the seats. The pan-democrats didn't fare too badly, with their 36% of the vote translating to 32% of the seats. It was the localists who were worst off. The 19% of the vote was halved to just 8.5% of the seats. The combined vote of localists and pan-democrats shows just how poorly this vote is reflected. Although the anti-establishment parties gained 55% of the vote, it was the pro-Beijing parties who got about that proportion of seats. So how does this translate into power? When voting separately, it's a complete mess. But obviously, with a majority of seats, the pro-Beijing party can vote as a bloc and wield 100% of the power for any vote that requires a simple majority. And even with all the weird rules that we discussed in the last video about LegCo, the pro-establishment bloc still has all the power. However, some laws, such as those that determine the rules of Hong Kong's democracy, require a supermajority of 2/3. In such cases, the pro-Beijing camp does not maintain all of the power. If the pan-democrats and localists are split, the pro-Beijing parties get about 60% of the power. However, the anti-establishment parties can vote as a bloc to decrease this power to half. So what would LegCo look like if Hong Kong was proportionally representative? If all 70 seats were split according to the party vote, the actual number of seats for each party would vary depending on the election method, but it should come out something like this. So what does this do for their power? If the anti-establishment coalition is split, all three camps get 1/3 of the power. But if anti-establishment parties vote as a single coalition, they wield all the power in a simple majority vote. Obviously, this would scare the pro-Beijing camp from moving towards proportional representation. But it isn't as bad for them as it looks. For important supermajority votes, the pro-Beijing camp would still hold half the power with the pan-democrats. In this case, the localists do not have any power. Hong Kong is pretty unique in the world in that its basic law requires their voting system to change in the future. As Hong Kong moves towards a more democratic system for LegCo, it will be important to understand how any new system will affect representation and power.